As you get older, your net worth increases, especially once you hit your 50s. Your kids are moving out, the house is paid down. But if you're not raising kids and your house is paid for, your expenses have dropped. But you've been at your job for 30 years, your income's high. That split generates net wealth. And we are our richest in the last 10 years before we retire. At that point, you liquidate your stocks and your bonds and you go into T-bills and cash. Because if there is a market or a currency crash, you will never be able to recover. So you have more and more money as you age until you're 65, and then it goes away. Normally, this hasn't really mattered, because normally this is what our demographic profiles have looked like. It's a standard pyramid: children at the top, children at the bottom, retirees at the top, everyone else stacked up in between. And normally, the thin slice of 65-year-olds that retire, one, it's not a very big chunk of the population, so it's not a big deal. And two, there are more 64-year-olds below that and 63-year-olds below that, and so on. And it's the same percentage every year that step back. So it doesn't really move things for society at large. But starting in the late 1940s, the Americans made globalization possible, which meant instead of you in your own economy having to generate the steel and the computers and the aluminum and the food and the energy all by yourself, you could focus on the things you did well and sell them abroad at a premium and then import the other stuff that you didn't have. Everyone could play. And as we all specialized, our incomes went up, and we all moved into cities to take the manufacturing and the services jobs. When you live on the farm, you live differently. Kids are free labor. You have a whole bunch of them. When you move into the city, kids are really expensive, questionable habits. And adults aren't dumb. So we've gone in this country in the last century and a half from having 7 kids on average to 2.2, right? Here's where we are now because of that change in behavior. The baby boomers, the largest generation we have ever had, is on the verge of retirement. In fact, on average, our baby boomers retire in the 4th quarter of this year, which means for the last couple of years, we see this ever-increasing pace of transfer of assets from those stocks and bonds into those T-bills and cash. And the result is much higher capital costs. We know that from January of last year to December of next year, capital costs have to increase by at least a factor of 5 because of a lack of supply. That's independent of anything the Fed does. The fact that the Fed is trying to deal with an inflation explosion at the same time, which might generate an economic turning, that's just bad luck and bad timing. So 5x increase in prices for capital, assuming the Fed stops right now, assuming the war stops right now. We know that there's a lot of ESG programs out there for green tech that if you raise the cost of capital by 100 or 500 basis points, they don't work anymore. Start thinking of 1,000 basis points. We're going to be there in less than 2 years. That's the capital side. There's also a labor question. The boomers are the largest generation we've ever had. Half of them will be retired by the end of this year. They are being replaced by a smaller generation. We've always known this was going to happen. We've known this was going to happen since the last of the Gen Xers were born in 1980. Are you ready? It's not going to work. This is a structural issue. This isn't people quietly quitting. This isn't COVID, although COVID did speed a few things up. This is demographic. If you want more workers who are 40, you needed to start 41 years ago. That's just how it works. I'm not going to draw a picture for you. Okay, next generation down, Gen X. This is my generation. We are part of the second smallest generation in American history. And when we look at the boomers, I mean, mostly we're just filled with disgust. But we have learned from them, even if it's just learned what not to do. When the boomers entered the market back in the 80s, there were so many of them that they pushed down the cost of labor because they competed each other for wages. That forced most families to put a second worker into the workforce. 2-income families. That generated the pressure that gave the boomers the highest divorce rate in history. Gen X looks at that and is like, wow, we're not doing that. For us, our families and our time are at least as important as our money. So we are far more likely to be single-income households, and we have a much higher marriage preservation rate than the boomers as a result. There are downsides to that. When you've got 800 gajillion boomers and like 112 Xers, and the Xers are the low men on the totem pole, you get the lowest wage increases in American history. Until now, because now all the boomers are going away. And even if all Xers wanted to work, And we do not. There would never be enough of us to fill all those shoes. So we are now seeing the highest increases in compensation in American history. And it's going to run for at least another 10 years. So for us, we are finally having our day. The rest of you know this is labor inflation and you can suck it. Zoomers, new kids on the block, born since 2000. They are the youngest generation. They are also the smallest generation. And they are not millennials. Now, millennials have a number of characteristics that are accurate and backed up by the data. Collegiate, cooperative, work well in groups, touchy-feely management skills, their forte, absolutely, strongly supported by the data. That's not the Zoomers. See, the millennials were raised by the boomers. They were told they were special, whatever. Zoomers were raised by Gen X. We never told them they were special. We told them they were behind, that they could never trust anyone, that Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid weren't going to be there for us, so of course they're not going to be there for you. You're on your own. You trust no one. You have to be better. Not better than the millennials. That's easy. No. Better than everyone. They're overachievers, but they're loners. And they have the highest suicide rate in American history. Probably because we told them that when they turn 17 and a half, they have to get the hell out of our house. Their dream job is to work in a locked closet coding in the dark. They're very loyal workers, but they never want to meet you. And if you need software work, this is great. We've got a whole generation custom built for it. But if you need somebody out on a line, oh my God, no. They are the most stilted workforce we were ever going to have. And we know exactly how many we have. We know exactly what the flow into the workforce for the next 20 years is going to be. They're already here. Just like we know exactly what the outflow because of the boomer retirement is going to be. This calendar year, that's a shortage of 400,000 workers a year. That will probably peak around 2032 at somewhere between 900,000 and 1.2 million shortage. That's our labor environment. We know exactly what it's going to look like for the next decade. Final generation, the millennials. We've talked about some of the positive aspects, so it's only fair to talk about some of the negative. Lazy, entitled, show up for work at the crack of 1 p.m. Data also supports that for half of them. The other half have always done everything we've always expected of them, demanded of them. They graduated from college in 3.5 years. They didn't go to Europe to find themselves for a decade. They went straight into the workforce. And because of it, they got screwed. When the financial crisis hit in 2008, they were the last ones in the door. They were the first ones kicked out. So whether it's because the millennials did everything right or everything wrong, they missed out on 3 to 5 years of core formative work experience in their 20s, and they will never get that back. They are the least skilled worker demographic we have ever had for their age group, and they will be until the day they retire. The hope for the labor market to get back to where we were in 2019 still lies with millennials, indirectly. It lies with their kids. A large generation generates a large generation. All we have to do for the labor market to fix itself is wait for the millennials to have their kids, for them to grow up, get trained, and then enter the workforce, which will first happen in large number in the year 2042. It's not often that you get an economist telling you exactly what's going to go down for 20 years. Run with it. Don't wait 3 months or 6 months or 9 months or 90 months if you need to hire. It will not get better than it is now.